All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul D'Ambrosio, and I teach Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University, where the四海为学collaborative learning project is based. I want to welcome you all to our 19th roundtable and our 74th event since 2022. Today, we have a roundtable on nothingness in the Zhuangzi, and our invited discussants are Kevin Turner from the Hong Kong Baptist University, Luyao from Peking University, and Rory O'Neill from the University of Macau. We also have our chair today, Qiao Yiwen, who is from the University of Macau as well. It has become a tradition here at 四海为学 to give younger scholars a chance to be part of high-profile academic events by inviting them to take part as chairs or discussants. So if there are any younger scholars in the audience who wish to take part in future events, please email me. This event today will be 2 hours total, ending promptly at 11 a.m. Beijing time. Before getting things started and handing them over to Yiwen, I just want to say a few things about the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Academic Forum. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project hopes to distinguish itself from some of the less productive conventional practices found in contemporary academia. As posted on our website, we are not interested in male peacocks, in jerks, or in any form of egoism or self-promotion. We hope to curb all types of aggressive and "look at me, I'm smarter than you," or "don't I know so much," and similar attitudes sometimes found in academic exchanges. We might even go so far as to say that we hope to be somewhat of a counterbalance for the negative attitudes often found in so-called blind reviews. While there is a time and a place for anonymity, or at least the appearance of anonymity, communication in academia should have just as much time and place for speaking to one another on more congenial and community-forming settings. The neologism 四海为学, which was created by Robin Wong, is a play on 四海为家, and we hope to keep this idea of 四海为家 at the foreground of all of our events. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project hopes to accomplish these shifts in orientation during academic exchanges by encouraging productive communication, humble discussions, real questions, and responses that are open and honest. We hope to foster environments where people truly learn from and with one another. So, before introducing our chair, I want to once again thank everyone in the audience, and especially the speakers for sharing their thoughts with us today. Our chair is Qiao Yiwen. She is currently a PhD student in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the University of Macau. Her research interests include transformations in ancient Chinese afterlife beliefs upon the arrival of Buddhism and the development of abdication theory. Thank you very much for hosting today, Yiwen. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Professor D'Ambrosio. Hi, everyone. I am Yiwen. I am delighted to be here. I would like you to know that there will be 4 sections in today's roundtable. The first 3 sections will each consist of a 10-minute presentation, followed by 2 8-minute discussions with the other 2 presenters. And in the final section, we will open the floor up to audience questions. And for our presenters, I will assist with time management. I have prepared notice boards indicating 3 minutes remaining, 1 minute remaining, and if necessarily, time up. And please check my window occasionally during your presentation. And now I will briefly introduce our 3 excellent presenters following the order of their presentations. So first we have Professor Kevin Turner. Professor Turner is an assistant professor in the Department of Religion and Philosophy at Hong Kong Baptist University. He received his PhD in Chinese philosophy at Peking University. He has published in journals such as Philosophy East and West, Tao, Asian Studies, and Sophia. He is also the translator of books by Wang Zhongjiang and Zhang Xianglong. His research centers on early Chinese philosophy, particularly Taoism and Confucianism, as well as comparative philosophy, focusing on the topic of self, body, and technology. His work engages closely with classical texts such as the Zhuangzi, offering fresh interpretations that challenge conventional assumptions. Today he is... Sorry, someone in the audience. I would like you to mute your mic. Okay, and today he is presenting the logic of Wu in Taoist philosophy. Dr. Li Luyao, our second presenter. Dr. Li is currently a postdoc fellow in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Peking University. She received her PhD in philosophy from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And her academic journey also includes research experience at the University of Chicago. Her work lies at the intersection of Taoist and comparative philosophy, with a particular focus on the Zhuangzi and Neo-Taoist Guoxiang. She explores enduring philosophical questions such as harmony and freedom. Her research bridges classical Chinese thought and contemporary concerns. Dr. Li has published in leading journals such as Asian Philosophy and the Philosophical Forum. She will present us Guoxiang's positive political interpretation of Wu in the Zhuangzi. And last but not least, we have Professor Rory O'Neill. Professor O'Neill is an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the University of Macau. He completed his doctoral work in Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University and has been recognized with several competitive distinctions, including the New Sinology Fellowship and a super postdoc appointment at Fudan University. His research focuses on early Taoist and Fajia traditions, and his work has been published in Chinese and comparative philosophy journals, including Tao and Asian Philosophy. His presentation title today is Complementary versus Extreme Wu Wei in the Zhuangzi Tianxia. Okay, so now I will hand it over to Professor Turner. Professor Turner, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for everybody being here. I am going to share my screen, so please let me know if this shows up. We good? Yes, no? Okay, good. So I'm going to make this full screen. Where is full screen? Okay, so, I only have 10 minutes to talk about this, 10 minutes plus or minus a couple. Obviously, the topic I have here is the logic of Wu in Taoist philosophy. This is also preliminary work. I've done some work on Wu in Zhuangzi, but I want to begin by talking a little bit about methodology. And this is very brief. The basic idea I have going on is looking at the idea of Wu through a genealogical method, looking at the logical space of reasons of Taoist philosophy. And what this means is I'm more interested in why the Taoist texts say what they say than what they actually say. And that might seem rather strange, but I think if we understand why they say the things they say, or why what they say makes sense in the way they say it or the way they might mean it, then we can better understand what they actually say. Rather than just saying, Taoism or Zhuangzi is all about Wu or whatever. Well, when Zhuangzi says Wu, why does he say what he says about Wu rather than what does he actually say? So that's kind of this idea of a genealogy of the logical space of reasons. And more so, going beyond that as well, I don't think Wu is simply a concept. I think it is a mode of thought. I think it is a way for us to understand how these Taoist texts, the Laozi, the Zhuangzi, the Liezi, the Huainanzi, all these texts think. So it's more than just looking at the single concept of Wu as it appears in these texts and looking at it as a mode of thought as it permeates the different discourses we might find therein. And so that's a little bit on the methodology. Now, moving to kind of the core of the problem I have on hand is the question of Taoist metaphysics. And here I've just outlined five kind of positions, if you will. And this is just descriptive here. I don't want to problematize this just yet. But you see Wang Bo on the far left, he's given us four different characterizations, right? Tao is nothing, Tao is something, Tao combines something and nothing. And then three and four are the same, the only difference being one's static and one's dynamic. And he's making the argument that Tao is a process. It's going from Wu to Yo to Wu. And so it's dynamic rather than static. We saw last week David Chai in the roundtable last week talk about Mayontology. Um, that's a thing, 虚无本体论 or 非存在本体论. I'm not quite sure how you translate Mayontology. But that's for him, it's all about ontological nothingness. And there is this, I have on the bottom here, there's this very dominant kind of interpretive thread focusing on Wang Bi and phenomenology. And David Chai is just an example. You have people like Eric Nelson and Fabian Heubel and Jana Roschker and a whole bunch of other people kind of in this tradition. And so that's one thing. Shang Geling, on the other hand, is saying, following kind of Guo Xiang, saying Zhuangzi is not metaphysical at all. He's anti-metaphysical, right? He's saying there is nothing, nothing is not, which isn't to say nothing is something, but it's nothing whatsoever. Mo Zhongshan, again, he has this idea of a double character. Right? We can talk about generation, non-generation, living negation, but for him, Dao is both Yo and Wu. And then you have, and he talks about these concepts as not ontological as well. And so you have the kind of similar idea in David Hall and Roger Ames, who don't translate or understand Wu and Yo, something and nothing in terms of metaphysics or ontology, but rather in terms of determinacy and indeterminacy. This is their translations. So this is kind of a very brief, very concise picture of what's going on in Taoist metaphysics. But I want to problematize this, right, on the impossibility or the possibility of Chinese metaphysics or ontology. And here I'm being very concise, very strict with my definition. Metaphysics or ontology as the science of being as being. Of course, if you blow up the meaning of metaphysics and you just say it's about reality, well, then this, is kind of irrelevant. But in a strict sense, this is what we're dealing with. And of course, there are two positions. We might outline three, kind of a middle way. I think Zheng Kai here is kind of in the middle. But the people who think that Chinese or Taoist metaphysics is possible, are saying, okay, they didn't have a copula, they weren't talking about being as an explicit concept, but the metaphysical problems are implicit, right? And then, Taoist metaphysics is self-evident from Wang Zhongtian, my PhD advisor. But on the other hand, you have Fang Zhaohui, who says, well, Bunti, this is a term that has really no prominence in the early texts. It's only something that comes along later. And so we really shouldn't be talking about, Chinese philosophy with Bunti Lu and this Western concept. Zheng Kai has an article on Bunti Lun ontology and metaphysics in the Chinese context, where he's saying, well, Bunti Lun is this Western thing, but we still have Taoist metaphysics. And so that's why I kind of want to put him in this middle place rather than also for and against. And then Hall and Ames, no strict transcendence. And so they're very against this kind of Chinese metaphysics in a strict sense. And so this is the problem. Well, what do we do here? Is it possible or is it not possible? And so kind of exploring this problem. And this brings us to the problem of being. Going very quickly through this, being translated into Chinese, or being in its own right, has these three different dimensions, which become three different terms in Chinese. And classical Chinese doesn't really have one term to convey all of these meanings. And so it becomes very problematic to translate them. Classical Chinese has no grammatical copula, so it can't make being an object of thought. And even when sure, a being becomes used as a copula, it is not made an object of philosophical reflection. It is still always on yo or wu. And so you don't have this idea or this discourse on being uh, in the Chinese philosophical tradition, and therefore, can we say it has metaphysics? In a strict sense, no. I don't think you can. And so, well, then what do we do then? How do we define Wu and how do we define Yo? Liu Xiang has this great book, and I don't know if I put it in my references, but it's a great book on the hermeneutics of the values of Chinese philosophy. Right? He outlines these, Yo is presence, it's holding a piece of meat right in the hand, so it's you have something. Right? Wang is this etymological thing. In a lot of ways, he's following Peng Pu here. But be that as it may, Wang is a loss of a blade sharpness, so you have something, you lose it. In that sense, it's similar to Wu in this case, and then this middle Wu, this one, and then Wu in this sense is foundational, or it's a nothingness. So he's the same with Peng Pu here, where they're trying to read this version of Wu as being some kind of super advanced, complex philosophical concept. I don't really know if you can go that far, but it's there. Xiong Li and Zhang Dainian, they both have this kind of particular relative absolute distinction. And then Peng Pu has this three-part distinction, right? I really think that his description of appears absent but is actually present, this is what we're dealing with when it comes to Taoist philosophy, rather than some kind of absolute nothing or what have you. I think it has these two, and this is, of course, open for debate. And what I'm very interested in as well is after you have Wang Bi and you have the Wei Jing period and you have this Chong You Lun, a revering being theory or what have you, you have a very strong tradition of anti-rhetoric or polemics. And that goes all the way up to today, right? Xiongshi Li, Zhang Dainian, and even I have listed here Yang Lihua, right? They're very much against this idea of an absolute Wu. And so what does this mean? What does this tell us about why do they have this polemics? Are they misunderstanding what's going on the Taoist side of things, or do the Taoists mean what they say, or is it something else? And I have 1 minute left, yeah. And so this is my last two slides. The logic of Wu, right? How does it make sense? This slide and the next one, the first one is negation, and I've listed some passages, right? In the Tao Te Ching, it's decrease and decrease until nothing is done with purpose, right? 未到日损, right? 顺之又损, 至于无为. And in the Zhuangzi, you have all this. I lost myself, fasting the heart, mind, so on and so forth. You have this method of negation, right? Negating. Then you also have subversion. This is also a part of Wu. In the Tao Te Ching, I think, for the interest of time, right? Chapter 4 from the Zhuangzi, everyone knows the use of the useful, but no one knows the use of the useless. This is subverting our idea of what use is or usefulness. Oh, that's my time. Perception. Then the last three is all about ambiguity, right? We have perceptual, epistemological, and ontological. I'll be done very quickly. Perceptual ambiguity. You look at something, but you don't see it. You listen to it, but you don't hear it, right? There's somehow you can't really quite make heads or tails of what you're perceiving. Epistemological ambiguity. How do I know what I call knowing is not actually knowing? How do I know what I call knowing is not actually not knowing is actually not? How do I know what I call not knowing is not actually knowing? From chapter 2 of the Zhuangzi. And ontological ambiguity, I think, is very interesting as well. Right, chapter 1 of the Zhuangzi of the Tao Te Ching, right? They come from the same source but have different names, being of the same source. They are mysterious. So it's both Yo and Wu. And then in Zhuangzi as well, chapter 6, Zhuangzi says Tao has reality and reliability, 有情有性. And then it's without action and without form, 无为无性. And then in chapter 25 as well. And so you really have this kind of theme of ambiguity, which functions in how we should understand Wu as a mode of thought, rather than just a concept, right? And so, I'm over time. I'll leave it there. This is my references, and I look forward very much to being asked lots of difficult questions. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much, Professor Turner.
I
And
will.
so we are now begin our discussion. Dr. Li, would you like to start?
Thank you, Kevin, for a very interesting talk. And I'm gonna have two questions. And the first one is that in the third part, you mentioned about the problem of discussion of being and non-being in Chinese philosophy, especially concerned that we do not have something 是 or 非是 that directly related to it. Then, and in the last part, you bring up we could like the 无 and maybe also the 有. Do you think like we could use the 有 categories to say that our the ontology of Taoist philosophy is based on that? If so, would that ignore something else that also related to the ontology in Taoist? Yeah, that's mainly the first question. And then the second thing I'm thinking about is oh, sorry. In the yeah, maybe I go with the first.
Professor Turner, did your mic?
Sorry, I muted myself. Hopefully I'm good now. I didn't say anything of value while I was muted. Um, I think it's a very difficult question working our way out of thinking in terms of being and non-being and how we understand these Taoist texts. And I think whether or not we're talking about Weijing Xuanxue, like so-called Neo-Taoism, or Pre-Qing Taoism, or something else, this has an influence on what we can say or should say, perhaps even what we're allowed to say. Right. So a lot of people, like Brooke Zipperin, for example, writes, it's only when you get to Guoxiang that you really have the idea of being, or you get to this Chongyou Lun, that you really have capital B being appear in the Chinese intellectual tradition. So if that's the case, well, then can we even translate Wu and Yo as non-being, being, or anything with an ontological significance in the early period in Zhuangzi, for example? Zipperin doesn't, right? He's all about irony and non-irony and perspectives and stuff. And so that's not really, it's not a thing for the early Taoists because they didn't have a concept of being in that sense. And I think if you're going to talk about ontology or metaphysics, then of course you're going to talk about Yo and Wu. And I think it's interesting. I had this slide on translations, right? When you're looking at the translations of Hegel, for example, Helin is using Yo to translate being. Now, why is that the case? That's an interesting question for me. Why did these early Chinese translators of Western philosophy look to Yo to translate being, or Zai and 存在 to translate being instead of something else? Probably because it looks the most like it. Perhaps in the intellectual tradition, it does have the most resonance and the most relation with this discourse that's found in the Western tradition. But it's very problematic because being, like in the case of Aristotle, Aristotle and Hegel, for example, it's is, right? It's not just like this thing that's there. It's inseparable from logic. And so when you don't have A is B or S is P, you don't really have being in a Hegelian sense, at least normally understood anyways. So I think that's my answer to your first question. Hopefully it's an answer.
Yeah, it's answered. And thank you. And my second question concerns about the in the last part you mentioned about like 5 different meanings or possible interpretations of wu. I'm thinking about how this could like contribute to the discussion of the first part, the discussion of I think the metaphysics in Chinese philosophy or something. I mean the previous discussion, how this could contribute or involved in that discussion. Would you like to bring up a new idea that different from them or something else? Yeah, thank you.
When you say previous discussion, you mean last week, like with May
No,
ontology,
no. I
or
mean the
with me?
first part in your
Okay.
slides.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think it's about figuring out what's going on in these texts and
Mhm.
trying to find an answer to the question, you know, Taoist metaphysics, is it possible? Is it, if it is possible, well, then what does that mean? Now, like I said, if you stick to a strict definition of metaphysics or ontology, then I don't think it's possible. But if you kind of open up the definition, um, you just think about what's reality, what is happening, so on and so forth, then sure. And obviously cosmology, what is the relationship between cosmology and metaphysics? That's also something to consider as well. I think what I don't think is helpful is not questioning our terms, not questioning our hermeneutical frameworks, and just taking everything for granted. And if we're going to call Chinese metaphysics or Taoist philosophy metaphysics, well, we have to be very critical about the terms we're using, because, as you know, I maintain that translation is interpretation. And so I don't think, like, I think you have to begin with what we're saying today in order to get to what was being said back then. And that is a difficult task. And I don't have an answer yet, but I think developing the logic of Wu, kind of seeing how Wu operates, not only as a concept, but as a mode of thought, is probably, well, I'll say more useful than just doing this kind of Wang-Bi phenomenological hermeneutics of, Taoism. That's useful, right? And that's been part of what everybody's been doing. But I think there's another way to go about it. So
Yeah,
thank you.
that's why.
Do we have time for more questions or?
Oh no.
We have 1 more minute.
Yeah, maybe we just go for Rory.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So we'll hand it over to Professor O'Neill.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin, for a great presentation. And I have three thoughts slash questions. So I guess I'll ask them all together, and then if time we can continue discussing. So I found it very interesting, the part of your methodology where you talked about why Zhuangzi talks about Wu, for example, is more important than what is actually said per se. And I wonder if we could use like the term concerns, like the concerns of a philosopher, to encapsulate this part of your methodology, taking the concerns as primary. And I wonder, in general terms, can this be a useful way of approaching comparative philosophy, than more useful maybe than, say, looking at a philosopher's view of the world, where there might tend to be even more unspoken assumptions that we bring in from other traditions or other approaches to philosophy when we try and just think of a philosopher's view of the world. Whereas if we look at the philosopher's concerns, then maybe we're more likely to view that, say, view of the world in the context of who that philosopher is responding to and so on. And that might not be a way of maybe avoiding a certain degree of these unwanted importations of other ideas. So that first thought, and I guess I'll ask them all together. So the second is about considering metaphysics as being. So I'm wondering, like, what motivates this understanding of metaphysics? If we just take a face value understanding of metaphysics, right? It's beyond what is physical, and maybe the standard translation in Chinese of 形而上学 is closer to this kind of definition than something like being as being. And I wonder are there some things that might be captured through this definition, like for example, creation or like creatio ex nihilo, like creation from nothing, right? Is this like included in being as being, or might there be some things that are not? And say looking at this 形而上学 as a translation slash definition of metaphysics, might that affect your understanding of whether metaphysics can be spoken of in early Chinese philosophy, or to what extent it can be spoken of? So that's my second point slash question. And then my third is about this 四五而有, this kind of appears absent but is actually present. You mentioned, like, say, David Chai's meontology at the beginning, and I wonder, could these two be spoken of together, or are they quite different? And also, in this context, talking about ambiguity, I wonder, does this ambiguity also relate to the relationship between Wu and Yo? So that's my third question, and I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, well, hopefully I have enough time to reply to all of your questions. So for the first one, yes, I do think this is a more useful way of doing comparative philosophy, and I should nuance that statement. I think this is I was going to say I think it is the only way, but that's not more nuanced. I think as comparative philosophers, our first task is to critically question ourselves, our assumptions and our prejudices, what we bring to the texts. And this involves, what Foucault calls a genealogy, or a critical genealogy. And I think it's the case both in the Western academic literature and in the Chinese academic literature that we have used terms uncritically for a very long time. Maybe some more so than others, but we have to really think about why we say the things we say, and not just say them. I mean, Zhuangzi is blah, blah, blah. Well, why do you say Zhuangzi is blah, blah, blah? What does that even mean? Where are you coming from? So on and so forth. And I think, I didn't mention it, but there's one of my biggest concerns is how do you do Chinese philosophy in Chinese? And this is why the question of translation and the question of the copula is so important, because it doesn't exist in classical Chinese, but it exists in modern Chinese. And so there is a gap between these two languages, right? And how did the idea of being come into modern Chinese? And how does the fact that modern Chinese has a copula influence our understanding of classical Chinese, right? These are the things that I'm concerned with. So, I'm not going to say it's the only or the best, but I think it is a necessary methodology or a necessary element of doing comparative philosophy. And I'll leave aside the concerns of a philosopher for when we have more time. The second question, Aristotle defines first philosophy in the metaphysics as being, the science of being. Now, metaphysics isn't a word he used, right? It's the after physics. It's a book title. But that's why I call it, that's the strict definition of metaphysics is the being as being, the science of being as being. And then if you want to start talking about Xing Shangxue and metaphysics, and again, that's a whole hermeneutical tangle we don't really have time to get into, because Xing Shangxue, is it metaphysics before it's translated as metaphysics? It's not about being, it's about Xing, being above and below. And if you look at Zhuangzi, for example, right, one of the arguments that Zhuangzi makes is that the I Ching doesn't talk about Wu and You. It talks about You Yin, or no, You Ming, right? What is hidden and what is not hidden, what is illuminated, manifest. And so, if we're translating Yo and Wu as being and non-being, well, then it's not even about those terms anyway, so it can't be about metaphysics. An interesting question for sure to explore. You ask about, appears to not be, but actually is, and May ontology. Uh, David Chai is all about the non-being of nothingness, ontological nothingness. I'm not sure he'd be on board with my understanding or Peng Pu's definition here. And yeah, the double character that Mo Zhongshan talks about of Dao is that it's both Yo and Wu, right? That's the ambiguity. Now, if you look at Wang Bo, he's going to say it's a process from Wu to Yo back to Wu. And so there's not really any ambiguity there. But I think there's still ways to make it make sense. Like Zhuangzi says, Dao wu suo bu zai. There is nowhere where Dao is not. Well, it's there, but it's not there because it's also somewhere else. That's ambiguous. That's ambiguous. And that's the logic of Wu at play. Well, wu suo bu zai, Wu is in that phrase. And so there's ambiguity in there. So I think, of course, those should be put together. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think that will be a good time to end our first section. And now we will begin our second section, and I will hand it over to Dr. Li. Dr. Li, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Yiwen. I'll try to share the screen. Did it work?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to make it. Why? Oh yeah. Thanks, Evan. My topic today is Guo Xiang's positive political interpretation of Wu in the Zhuangzi. So, before I start, I will just briefly introduce Guo Xiang. He's a very influential philosophy in Neo-Daoism, and the most representative work of him is his commentary on the Zhuangzi. And among all the commentaries of Zhuangzi, Guo Xiang's work is the most important one. So today I'm going to talk about how Guo Xiang would interpret the concept of Wu in the Zhuangzi, and it mainly includes 5 parts. The first part is about the current discussion of Wu in Guo Xiang's commentary. It mainly focuses on the negative ontological Wu in Guo Xiang's thought. And so I'm going to propose a positive political Wu in the Guo Xiang thought in the second part, and further explore it in the third and fourth part. And I will focus mainly on Wu Xin, the unself-conscious, in the second part, and discuss the different perspectives of it. And also in the fourth part, further considering the Wu Yong, the non-self usage, Wu Zhi, non-self knowledge, and Wu Qing, impartialities in the Guo Xiang's commentary. And in the last part, I would conclude by discuss the private and public in this usage of Wu. So we go to the first part, the negative ontological Wu in the Guo Xiang thought. As Tang Yongtong has mentioned, that one of the main concerns in the Neo-Daoism is ontological discussion, and such ontological discussion is used for its political purpose. So we first come to the ontological discussion, and Tang Yijie divided different stages of the ontological development in the Neo-Daoism. We could see here that for Wang Bi, as a representative philosophy, Gui Wu value non-being, and Guo Xiang is famous for his 崇有 that value being, and the last 僧肇非有非无 devalue both being and non-being. For Guo Xiang's part, there are also scholars that discuss 有 or 无 from the different perspective and develop how Guo Xiang could 崇有 or value being. And most scholars would say 笃化 as long transformation. The difference between 笃化 or with just only say 崇有 mainly lies in the 崇有 at least for Pei Wei, who is also famous for the idea of 崇有, is that he focused on the on many things, the being of many things. But for Guo Xiang, he focused on the being of one thing, always is the individual. And besides that, Feng Youlan also said that Guo Xiang, the idea could be described as wu, that the denial of non-being, just very similar to the value of being. And Yang Lihua further developed it, said it is not the denial of non-being, but the interpretation of non-being. But he mainly has a similar idea that the wu is not the source or the or in charge of the function of everything or the source of everything. So in general, no matter how we say about the wu in the Guo Xiang thought from the ontological perspective, Guo Xiang in general like deny the value of wu or mainly focus on the negative side of wu in the ontological perspective. So there are several limitations of such discussion. That the first, these discussions mainly focus on the ontological dimension, while its political dimension has largely neglected or less discussed. Second, these discussions primarily emphasize the negative side of while overlooking its positive function. And the third thing is that these discussions focus mainly on Guo Xiang's response to the Wei Jing concern, while neglecting how Guo Xiang, as a commentator to the Zhuangzi, developed the Zhuangzi's idea to address the issues in Wei Jing period. So I tried to develop the Wu in Guo Xiang's thought from the positive political perspective. And the first, from the political perspective, Wu is usually expressed through the compound concepts such as Wu Xin, Wu Qing. And then the second, although most of the concepts already appear in Zhuangzi, Guo Xiang accepts this basic meaning as negations of conscious knowledge and action, but more importantly, he develops them in a political direction. And then the last thing is that some scholars, including Paul D'Ambrosio, has explored Guo Xiang's development of the Zhuangzi notion, such as Wu Wei effortless action and its political orientation. And I will try to build on that studies further explore the other concept such as Wu Xin, Wu Yong, Wu Zhi, Wu Qing, and others. So this study mainly focus on two perspectives. The first is switch from the ordinary is that Guo Xiang discussed a Wu switch from the ordinary individuals to a sage king, with particular emphasis placed on the Wu of the sage king. And second, Guo Xiang enriches the meaning of Wu by further elaborating its characteristic and its political functions within politics. And I just briefly discussed these different perspectives of Wu Xin. The first thing is that Guo Xiang developed such concept of Wu Xin from the personal perspective to the sage king's perspective, and the main characteristic of it is being responsive for the sage king. And only in this case, he could allow others to allow like people with different ideas to work together. And the second thing is he could allow others to be the master of themselves without interference. And the third character is that the Xin of the Sage King could allow him to follow the transformation of the world in the changing society. And about the other concepts of Wu, including the Wu Qing, as we could see here, that only if the Sage King do not have their own emotions, or he could be in partiality, he could allow the things to, he could just go along with the things. And this is why it is impartiality alone who could perfectly fulfill his nature endowment. And the second is Wu Yong. It's worth noting that the Wu Yong for the Zhuangzi mainly focus on the individuals, but for Guo Xiang, he also developed it to the Sage King, and it is mainly focused on the Sage King does not do the self-usage and allow anyone else to do their self-usage. And the last thing is the Wu Zhi or the Sage King do not use his self-knowledge to govern the society. Here comes to the conclusion that the discussion of the Wu in the Guoxiang from the political perspective could give us a picture that he transferred the idea of Wu in Zhuangzi from the private to the public. The first thing is that it is not only focused on the individual, but also the first thing is it is a positive use of Wu, but not just focus on its negative perspective. And second, it developed from the individual to the sage. From the individual to the political practice. And the last thing is that the Sage Kings, Wu Xin, Wu Zhi, Wu Qing, Wu Yong, mainly focus on that the Sage King does not allow his personal intentions, knowledge, emotions, self-serving tendencies to shape his governance of society. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Li. And now I would like to invite Professor Turner to in the first round of discussion.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for the presentation as well. Quite some interesting things in there. I think I have basically two questions. And the first one is hopefully rather simple. When we have phrases like 无情, 无知, 无用, 无为, what does this 无 mean? Does it just mean lack with not have? Like you're translating it as non, which would be something like fei in modern Chinese rather than wu. Does it just mean simple lack? Or is it more something, is there something more going on in the wu when we say something like 比无情, to be impartial, right? Is there something more in the wu there? So that's my first question. And would you like to answer that first?
Okay. Yeah, I think the main idea is, as you said, is to deny or to say that the none or the lack of something, because it is trying to say that the Sage King does not have his personal intentions or emotions or something else or self-usage when he governs the society. So I think the lack or the none of it is the main idea, but it possibly it has other ideas involved in the Wu, and yeah, I will try to do a further research about that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking maybe it's, I don't know. In Zhuangzi, Wu seems to be more like an activity than a complete lack of one thing. It's not an A-B category. But, if we have more time, maybe we can circle back to that. My second question has to do with, the political philosophy of Guoxiang. And it seems to me that it's very much like what we find in the Tao Te Ching, especially as Wang Bo has read it, right? Wang Bo says, if the ruler wu wei, if the ruler does nothing, then the baixing, the common people will ziran, will self-sow. And that seems to be a lot like what you're saying. As long as the ruler is just, out playing golf and doing nothing, then the people will be fine on their own. That's kind of the Tao, the Lao Tzu conception of political philosophy, and it seems to be how you're describing Guoxiang. And that's very interesting because Guoxiang's commenting on the Zhuangzi, not the Lao Tzu. So I'm wondering whether you agree with that, and then that characterization of Guoxiang's philosophy, and then why would he be more like a Laozian than a Zhuangzi when it comes to political philosophy?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. But I think there might be a slight difference between Guoxiang and the Laozi idea of like, okay, Wu Wei just do and allow anyone to be self-sold. I think yeah, it's a main idea, but Guoxiang seems a slight different from it, that especially when we considering when we consider the 无知 part. Guo Xiang both mentioned 无知 and 圣知, and he thinks that we cannot give up the knowledge of the sage king, and if we give up the knowledge of the sage king and only allow for the ordinary people have their own knowledge, that would be a disaster. So he thinks that the knowledge of the sage king is very important, and that that not only lies in that to allow anyone to be self-sold, but also lies in he could always find a better way to be responsive to all others, and to be responsive to the transformation of the world. So it's more about it's also about the arrangement of things, not only just I think not only just the self-soul part. There are except for not using not using one's own self-knowledge, usage. There is the other part of Guoxiang's concern is the arrangement of everything. If we use the word directly from Guoxiang's text, it's 序万物之性, which is in the Zhuangzi, which is at the very beginning of his commentary. That is the important part of his 内圣外王之道 also. So it's like to place an order to the everyone's human nature or something. That is he's different to Lao Tzu, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
think in the interest of time, I'll hand it off to Rory, if that's okay.
Oh, okay, we still have 2 minutes, but Professor O'Neill, you can begin.
Okay, thank you. So some of my questions are related to Kevin, so maybe we can continue to discuss. So yeah, the first thing I was going to ask was quite similar to Kevin's first question, but I'll still talk about it a bit, just about this Wu Qing, Wu Xin, Wu Yong, and so on. This Wu and its relationship to a Wu, a general Wu, right? And because you've already discussed it, I will maybe put forward a possibility, like, okay, we have this understanding of a general kind of Wu. Wu is a kind of concept that might be ontological or may ontological, or it might be an activity, like Kevin mentioned, right? And then could the collection of Wu Qing, Wu Xin, Wu Yong actually what Ames and Hall and Ames call Wu forms, right? Could they be a way of understanding the general Wu, right? So could you work kind of in that direction, like that? Actually, those kind of come first, and then they create an understanding of the Wu in general. So that's my first question. Do you mind? Will I ask them all, or?
Maybe we go one by one.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very interesting perspective and very inspiring. Actually, there is one big difficult for understanding Zhuangzi is how to connect his ontology to his political philosophy, and that is also if we trace back to Tang Yongtong's discuss to the Wei Jin philosophy that their ontology is to like contribute to their political discussion. So yeah, I'm also thinking how this 无情无用无为that political discussion could serve the ontology discuss. Maybe one direction I'm thinking about is that in all this use of it also includes some kinds of 有 in their sense that for example the 无心 in the for the 国相, he might say that the sage king could be 无心, but ordinary people could 有心, have their own heart mind or have their own self-conscious. So there is also a tension between 有 and 无, being or non-being, let's say. Yeah, so I'm not sure whether this could contribute to our understanding of ontology, but the 无 is, yeah, if we continue with Kevin's question, it might not only the non or yeah. Does that answer?
Yeah, it does. It does. Thank you. Okay, so then I guess my next question is kind of related because you mentioned how there is a kind of yo maybe in these Wu forms, right? Like the Wu Qing, Wu Zhi, Wu Yong, and so on. Because you mentioned that Guo Xiang Chong Yo, right? That he upholds the yo, right? And then it's quite interesting to then give a talk where it's all about these Wu forms, right? As to show that he Chong Yo, to show that he, yeah. And actually, just a bit more specifically, you mentioned about this Wu Zhi, this kind of lack of knowledge or non-knowledge. And then also this Sheng Zhi, which is the knowledge of the sage, is that right? So could this Sheng Zhi be a kind of yo form? And is it arrived through this Wu Zhi? Is it arrived through this kind of practice of non-knowing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very important. And I'm also thinking about this because like Guo Xiang, he mentions about the Sheng Zhi and Wu Zhi all in his books. And the Sheng Zhi, I think we could say in this way, the Sheng Zhi lies in his Wu Zhi, about the non-self knowledge or non-usage of the self-knowledge. And then that is at least one part of Sheng Zhi. Maybe the Sheng Zhi also includes others, but Wu Zhi definitely one important perspective of Sheng Zhi for Guo Xiang.
Okay, thank you. So then just on your conclusion about the Gong and Su, the private and public, so I wonder, the Zhuangzi, like before Guo Xiang's involvement, and let's say before Guo Xiang's politicization, could the Zhuangzi already be promoting some kind of gong in this kind of 天下为公 kind of gong, where it's not necessarily political, but somehow all-encompassing or all-embracing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, I have not yet done research about that, but I think in general that the 治公 idea is 国相 own development because for the 治公 is directly from his commentary to the Zhuangzi, and it always appears. It also appears in his other discussions, not only about the concept of Wu, but in other texts such as the 智公 in like teaching, the 教化 or something else. But for Zhuangzi, I think, first for Zhuangzi, he mainly focused on the individuals rather than the public order, and
Right.
yeah, and I'm not sure whether he also discussed the gong like from the personal perspective or the social perspective. Yeah, I would
Right.
further do research about it.
Okay, thank you. And I just have one very small comment, actually, to Kevin, just that, because you mentioned this Wu Zhi, Wu Yong, and so on, that the ruler is off playing golf, but I think the Zhuangzi as a text would be very much opposed to golf and golf culture in general. But that's just that could be a topic for further discussion, maybe. Yeah, I don't have any more comments, but thank you very much, Luyao, for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Rory.
Thank you, Professor O'Neill, and thank you, Dr. Li. This will be a perfect time to end our second section. And now let's move on to our third section, and I'll hand it over to Professor O'Neill.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will try and share full screen and let me know if it doesn't work. So just one moment. Okay, can you see this? Yep. And is it in full screen now? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to talk about really themes that have already been discussed, I think. Wu Wei as a kind of combination. No, well, it's not a combination, but a complement to Yo. It's following on from this idea of Wu and Yo being somehow complementary. And I would like to discuss this in the context of the Zhuangzi Tianxia, looking at the Guanyin and Laodan and the Jixia scholars. So first I will talk about this complementary Wu Wei and how I understand it, and then move on to talking about this Zhuangzi Tianxia. Then there is a third part of this project which I won't have time to talk about today, but it relates to this figure of Shen Dao, who is one of these Jixia scholars, and talks about this Zhang Guoce story as a way of illustrating how he might be portrayed in this way in the Tianxia, and also an illustration of this extreme Wu Wei as opposed to a complementary one. So complementary Wu Wei to begin with. So we have sometimes Wu Wei kind of singled out as a isolatable ideal, right? Or the pinnacle of Taoist philosophy, and treating it as an ideal in and of itself, right? So like a personal and spiritual ideal. But then also taking it as like a political or practical instantiation of Ziran, where Ziran is the core value of Laozi's philosophy, and Wu Wei is an instantiation of this. So we have then sometimes in political context talking about Wu Wei as positive, right, and maybe natural and Ziran, and then Yo Wei as negative. So these are the kind of understandings of Wu Wei that I'm questioning here. So then moving towards how I'm understanding Wu Wei is talking about Wu Wei as kind of blending opposites. So one way that this might happen is, say, in the Huanglao kind of context, where you have Wu Wei in service of Yo Wei. So you have this blending of Wu Wei and Yo Wei. Or this state maternalism where, say, there's an understanding of the Laozi where the sage is a kind of overseer of positive and negative activity, of Wu Wei and Yo Wei activity. Or we might think of Wu Wei understood as harmony, so bringing together maybe disjointed kind of different parts of society or different ideas that don't fit together very well. So we can also think of Wu Wei in terms of then paradox. As leaders who cannot or choose not to lead, or as Paul D'Ambrosio talks about it in Guoxiang, this Wu Wei as involving a whole lot of Yo Wei, and we just had discussion of that there from Luyao. So Wu Wei, this was mentioned also, I think, by Kevin, can also be understood in complement to Ziran. So this is, I think, is a subtle distinction to, say, Karen Lau's understanding of Wu Wei as an instantiation of Ziran, a practical application of Ziran, right? Where Wu Wei and Ziran are kind of complementary. They remain on separate spheres, where Ziran is this activity of the people and Wu Wei of the ruler. And you have this tension within the Laozi of this mysterious virtue, this Xuande, which kind of this wei er bu shi, this acting but not relying on, where you have a kind of a Yo Wei and a Wu Wei at the same time. Brooks of Horn understands this Wu Wei in this A-B format as involving both the A and the B. That means both, like, say, the purposiveness and the purposelessness. So this idea of complementarity is closely related to also correlativity, which comes partly from A.C. Graham, and he talks about it also in context of, say, Derrida, breaking these dichotomies. And then he talks in the context of the Laozi that in being submissive, that the sage is also oriented towards strength. But correlativity is quite a broad term. So just to mention Karen Lai again, she mentions how Ziran and Wu Wei are correlative in her understanding, but that's quite different to how I mean it here, because she treats them as in some way equivalent. Whereas here, I'm looking at this complementary aspect of correlativity, which is that they remain distinct and somehow opposing. So when A.C. Graham mentions how opposites are mutually productive in the Chinese tradition and not in the Western, he mentions how this is pre-quantum physics. So just mentioning Niels Bohr here, and this is his coat of arms here, which involves the yin-yang symbol. So complementarity in this quantum theory context is about two ways of measuring these properties, like photons and so on, where depending on the setup of the experiment, you get two different and complementary readings or observations that cannot be brought together. So you have this wave theory and particle theory, and they cannot be married, but they both contribute to the picture of the whole. So this is an aspect of complementarity that I'm interested in, which where you're talking about one aspect, for example, Wu Wei, and it complements the Yo Wei, but they're not easily spoken of in the same moment. So they have to somehow remain distinct while still contributing to the whole. So this, actually, I'm not fully sure that this illustrates this point, but Mother talks about this, the wheel as the Tao, and how this empty center is the Wu Wei and is the ruler, and then the spokes are the Yo Wei ministers. And he talks about this relative opposition between the ministers, and then how there's an absolute opposition between the ruler in the center and the ministers and the spokes. And the point being that in this absolute opposition that they cannot be switched. So this gets at it to a certain extent because there is a kind of a line that cannot be crossed between the Yo way and the Wu way, right? So they remain necessarily distinct. So when, for example, we talk about the sage putting themselves behind, right? There's no real explanation of how this results in the sage coming to the fore. And also, Taoism can be understood as a complement to Confucianism, but they remain necessarily distinct and opposing in order to be complementary. Okay, I'm running out of time already, but to talk about the text, so in this Zhuangzi Tianxia, so the format of this chapter is this kind of Guanglao synthetic mode where there is the authors sense a kind of a wholeness, and then they talk about how all of these scholars or philosophers grasp a certain part of it. And Guanyin and Lao Dan are included in those scholars who only grasp one part, but as people who have more wisdom than others. So they are the positive representation of this chapter. And then I'm looking at the Jixia scholars as people who have failed at grasping Wu Wei. But what's interesting to note is that these Jixia scholars like Peng Meng, Tian Pian, and Shen Dao, they grasp, they seem to have these kind of Taoist traits. They are Gong or Budang, right, which is also closely in line with the Fa Jia or the Huanglao, the Shen Dao, right? But they also have this aversion towards knowledge, especially this kind of strategic knowledge, and also towards choosing between things, which seems quite Lao Zhuang, right? They also have this Qi Wang Wu Yiwei show, this take equalizing all things as the first principle, which of course reminds us of the Zhuangzi, okay? And they are reluctant to make selections because that means forfeiting the whole. So Shen Dao, we see here, abandons knowledge and eradicates the self, right? So you have this kind of Wuji type cultivation, and also against knowledge, right? And then choosing no particular course. And also is suspicious of the great sages of the world, which is a theme we also have in the Laozi and the Zhuangzi, is questioning these great sages. But then, okay, fluttering about in the wind, maybe reminiscent of this kind of carefree wandering, this Xiao Yao Yo. And then they have this fullness that they don't lose by choosing or negating. Well, okay, so this is how then it starts to get into a negative description, that they only negate. That, okay, they manage to remain somehow blameless, but they do this by not establishing themselves in a positive manner. Okay, so my time is up, but I will just continue very briefly. So in the end of this description here, we have this description of Shen Dao and others as not having grasped the Dao, and having cultivated this way that is more fitting to dead people than people who are alive. He is maybe blameless or faultless, but is just like a piece of earth. Okay, so then, sorry, I know I'm out of time, but then in contrast to this, we have this description of Guanyin and Lao Dan, who, and this, the interpretation of this Chang Wu Yo is disputed, but it can understand it as the constancy of what is there and what is not there. And they hold to this this great wholeness, this Tai Yi. And in the description of Lao Dan and Guanyin, we have this strong complementarity between this being behind while others seek to be in front. Right? We have these passages from the Laozi which put forward these complementary parts of this knowing the masculine and holding to the feminine, right? The same with brightness and darkness and so on, right? And they choose to be behind, right? But this is in contrast or in complement to the people who strive to be in front. They do not store things, but this again is in complement to having a sufficient store of things. So the contrast that comes to the fore when we compare this description of Lao Dan with the description of the Jixia scholars is that there is this kind of complementarity in the Lao Dan description that we don't have in the Jixia. So that's why I present this as a way of understanding, especially this negative appraisal of the Jixia, as they have gone to extremes of negation, and that's where they are dismissed. So this cannot be explained as just a difference between Lao Zhuang and Huang Lao, as some scholars would, I think, bring a lot of presumptions to explain the contrast. Okay, I'm really out of time now, and I can't talk about this part, so I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor O'Neill. And Professor Turner, would you like to begin the discussion?
Okay, so obviously there's a lot going on in there, and I don't have any questions about your textual reading of the Tianxia chapter. I do have questions more about, I guess, let's say your theoretical whatnot. My first question is, Benjamin Schwartz makes a distinction between Wu Wei and Wu Wei, right? Doing nothing and having no purpose. And I'm wondering if we most often translate Wu Wei as non-action, right? Sometimes you get without purpose. I translated it as acting without purpose in my presentation. But I'm wondering if that distinction is relevant, or what you think of that distinction. And then I have a kind of a related question because it's about, well, I have a couple of questions about Wu Wei, of course. So there's this, but not acting and having no purpose. And then that goes into the next one, this kind of idea of a paradox. Why do we call it a paradox? Is it because it's paradoxical, or because we can't make heads or tails of it? And like, I think if we understand Wu Wei as a mode of action rather than a lack of action, it's no longer paradoxical, right? And in the Taoist text, it's clearly not. Maybe for the Jixia scholars, it is go and do nothing. But for the political theorists of the time, Wu Wei is certainly not do absolutely nothing. It's a mode of action, right? A non-purposive mode of action. And so in that sense, well, I guess maybe you have a non-purposive mode of action is already paradoxical, but as Hall and Ames translate it, non-coercive. And in that sense, it isn't paradoxical, right? So perhaps maybe you can answer those two questions before I have I move on to my other ones.
Okay, sure. Thank you. The Wu Wei and Wu Wei, this is an interesting point, certainly. And I think you actually almost kind of answered your own question in the second part, because you mentioned it in relation to the Jixia scholars, or a similar idea in relation to the Jixia scholars. Yeah, it is entirely possible that they only understand this kind of non-action, right? Rather than understanding this non-purpose, maybe. But on the other hand, they do still take action. So I don't think that fully kind of solves the problem of understanding why they are derided so much in the Tianxia. I think it is still something about intention. It's something about intention in all cases, for the Jixia and elsewhere. And it's, I think, something about their intentions don't play out with a sufficient complement, right? So where they might achieve kind of short-term goals in this understanding of these Jixia scholars through this kind of trick or method of Wu Wei, right? But then they don't grasp this depth of the Guan Lao, where they have a kind of more deep-seated thrust to their political philosophy and how they want to form or shape the world. And so that's the kind of complement that is missing. So that's kind of gone off your point, but yeah. Then about the paradox, that's a very interesting question. Is it really paradoxical and unresolvable, or is it that we cannot make heads or tails of it, that we just can't understand it? So something like, for example, trying not to try, a kind of paradox, right? Or because we cannot understand, and this is in the practical sphere, so not a paradox of fact, but a paradox of kind of action or intention, because we cannot simultaneously understand or embody trying and not trying. But the idea of complement, I think, allows the two to coexist, but they cannot be spoken of at the same time. You can only speak of one or the other. So is that still a paradox? I'm not really sure about that. And about this, the translations of non-coercive and so on, what I think, like, they're certainly not wrong or misguided in any way, but why I would choose here not to really lean into those is that they manage to describe this moment of Wu Wei in one idea that can be understood as a single thing, this non-coercive action. Whereas I'm trying to put forward this interplay between two things that cannot easily be spoken of at the same time, this interaction or between the yo and the wu. And those kinds of descriptions don't really get that message across, as far as I understand.
Okay, and so I have a couple more minutes left for some follow-up questions, right?
It's 2 minutes.
Okay, well then I'll be quick then. So you in your presentation, I think you're struggling a little bit with language, complementarity or correlativity or what have you. I'm just going to throw out what I'm pretty sure it comes from Holonym, but they call aspectual language, right? Yin yang are aspects. Dao and Wu, things, are aspects of the same thing. Maybe Wu Wei and Ziran or whatever, Yo Wei are aspects of the same thing. And that would be because, they're coming out of AC and his correlativity as well. So I'm just going to throw that out there. But then I'm also going to ask a question about what is opposite Wu Wei. Because it seems to me you can have, or maybe not opposite, maybe opposite's the wrong word, but you have Yo Wei is obviously opposite Wu Wei. But Ziran is correlative with Wu Wei, and Ziran is opposite of Yo Wei. Because Yo Wei is artificial action, Ziran is natural, right? It's non-artificial. And you have kind of this three-pronged definition, or this three-pointed triangular relationship of concepts. And I'm wondering if you might be able to find your meaning by triangulating those three concepts. Like, it's at what you want is in between those 3 points rather than on any one of those points.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, here I'm not investigating into correlativity per se. I mentioned that, I guess, because when A.C. Graham talks about complementarity, you mentioned it under correlativity. But correlativity, I think, holds a lot of different things. And I think there's something about complementarity that should be singled out and shown, right? So that is my main interest. But your point about Ziran and Yo Wei being opposites is interesting. Because yeah, I mean, I guess I thought of Wu Wei as being complement to Yo Wei, and also Wu Wei being complement to Ziran, right? Where you have this emanation, which is this Ziran, and then you also have this Wu Wei, which actually involves a certain amount of restraint, which of course questions then its translation as effortless, or yeah. But I see also your point, how those could be considered correlative and Wu Wei and Liu Wei as complementary and oppositional, and you have a triangle there. Yeah, I'll have to think more about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Turner. I would invite Dr. Li to come in for her discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Rory. It's very inspiring that you think from this perspective of commentary and extreme way of these two group of scholars. I read the 天下篇 several times, but didn't find out this interesting part. So my question is about especially related to Kevin's talking about non-action or non-intention understanding of Wu Wei. I'm thinking the real difference between the complementary and extreme Wu Wei, or could we are you going to develop further that more than just their difference, that could we it be helpful to understand their development connection or in any other perspective? That's a concern. And then the second sense, if we talk about non-action, it seems that the complementary and the extreme way are both include some kind of non-action that they do almost in the same way that the Sage King do not close to nothing. The extreme one that they might say we do not use the Sage King, we give up the Sage King, we just no government or similar to that. And the complementary one said, okay, the Sage King we have it, but he would do nothing. So is there a difference in this perspective? Yeah, that's my first question.
Thank you very much. So I think those were two questions, right? Yeah. And the first, right, about maybe not thinking just about their difference, but also about their mutual kind of development, right? With this complementary and extreme Wu Wei. I'll see now how that's related also to the second part. But yeah, I think it is interesting. And the part of this project that I didn't talk about is looking at this story from the Zhangguo Ce, which involves somebody called Shenzi, right? We don't know if it's actually a historical account of Shendao. We don't even know if it's relating to that Shenzi, right? But it tells about somebody who acts, but in a very kind of feckless way, right? Like opportunistic type way, and doesn't seem to have any long-standing convictions about how one should act. But through these kind of tricks of Wu Wei, manages to bring about the best result for the king. So is this complementary use of Wu Wei or not? And it seems to fall somehow in between, right? Because in this story, this advisor, he does use the ministers, uses the Yo way of the ministers, right? And then refrains from making decisions himself, but allows them to act, right? So in this way, it's a complement of this restraint and non-decision with the acting and deciding of the ministers. But then on the other hand, there seems to be something a bit different from what's described in like Guanyin and Laodan, where they have this, they take the root, the depth as their root. And there's something deeper than this kind of opportunistic, like, but okay, maybe I'm going a bit off your question now, but I think that it's difficult to point to exactly when it is extreme or when it is complementary, and there are definite like close calls between the two. But then to get on to your second point about how both the complementary and the extreme involve doing nothing. And I think that is actually, I fully agree with you. And I think that that is a reason to speak about complementarity in this context. Because let's say, for example, in the Lunyu, when Shun is talked about as sitting and in a dignified way and facing south, and how like this is a kind of instantiation of Wu Wei, and I would consider this as a complementary one. Like according to the legend, Yao had established the kingdom, and then Shun was the receiver and is complementary Wu Wei, in complement to Yao. So this here is doing nothing, right? And then you also have like in this the Tianxia description of the Jixia scholars, where they do not take on any responsibility, right? They don't have any political roles, and they laugh at sagehood, and they get rid of knowledge, and they and so on. And this is also a kind of doing nothing, but it lacks that complement, right? So I guess, and this kind of goes back to Kevin's question about translation is like non-coercive action. I don't think that Wu Wei is necessarily action in all cases. Sometimes this doing nothing actually can be a fine translation for it in certain contexts. What's important is the context in which it is happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you, Rory. I would like follow up a little bit. If we like continue to think about it from the non-intention part, the Wu Wei, for the complementary one, that it might not non-intention. The intention is to go the opposite side, to be You Wei, might, because it's complementary. So we do the Wu Wei part to realize the You Wei outcome. But if we think about the extreme way, like we do not need the sage, do not need the king, and then everyone could maybe realize their self soul, or they could mind their own business. That is also a kind of you. I mean, the intention is also the kind of you way. I'm wondering whether this makes sense. And then my second question is, there are the different paragraphs in the Tianxia Pian that describes different philosophy that might go step by step. Some scholar will argue that. So if we go from the extreme Wu Wei to the complementary Wu Wei, and then we'll go to the last part, the Zhuangzi. I noted that in the Zhuangzi, in Tianxia Pian's discussion about Zhuangzi, it doesn't mention Wu Wei, but in the Zhuangzi text, there are Wu Wei or some similar ideas. So what do you think about the Wu Wei in the Zhuangzi? Could we say that his thought about Wu Wei would be a further development of the extreme and complementary, or his thought could be one of this group being one of, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the great questions and difficult questions. So I think that like complementarity is I think an important aspect of thinking about Wu Wei. And I think in both of your presentations, this also came to the fore, right? So it doesn't necessarily describe one particular kind of action, right? And just like, for example, you can have this complementarity happening within a person. And Chris Fraser talks about this in his book review of Singerland's Effortless Action book, about how you can have a Wu Wei of a performer, right? But this happens on the basis of that performer having practiced a lot in advance, right? So here you have within a person this complementarity of kind of Yo Wei and Wu Wei. But then in a totally different context, that then is in contrast to maybe just being lazy and not practicing at all and understanding this as Wu Wei, right? And this maybe might be more closer to this extreme way. But then okay, here we're dismissing laziness and doing nothing in the context of practicing an instrument, but then maybe in a political situation, maybe actually doing nothing is what's required, right? Based on the context. So then in that case, it's fine. Okay, I'm maybe repeating myself a bit. So I'll try to get on to your other questions about, well, maybe I'll just speak to the part about Zhuangzi. And I think the description of Zhuangzi in the Tianxia is quite difficult to parse. Like, and it's not easy for me to talk about it in this context, right? In the like, I think the Guanyin and there's the Guanlao and the Jixia can be spoken of quite easily together. There seems to be a definite kind of, maybe not so definite, but you can easily imagine that it's a kind of a political philosophy that is speaking to this Wu Wei and these political kind of terms. Whereas the Zhuangzi is kind of described in there as like this scholar who is also great, but kind of floats around and understands, the kind of pointlessness of political action. I think there's something like that mentioned about Zhuangzi, and he writes a lot and these kind of profuse words, and they kind of have meaning. But then I wonder also, is there some kind of criticism of Zhuangzhou implied in the Jixia or in the Tianxia, that he kind of speaks too much or writes too much nonsense? Yeah, it's difficult to speak about. But then you also mentioned just Wu Wei and the Zhuangzi more generally. Yeah, I think it's a big question. I think I'm just not going to answer it. Maybe you can speak about it. Yeah, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rory.
Thank you, Professor O'Neill. Thank you, Dr. Li. I think this would be a good time to end our third section. So right now, we aim to end this roundtable at 11 o'clock, and right now we have about 22 minutes left, so we can open up the floor to the audience. I would like to invite our audience to raise their hands so I can, or if any of you prefer to type out your question in our common chat room, I can read it out for you. Okay, I see a hand from Nicole. Nicole, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My camera is not working. Sorry if I won't show my face this time. Thank you all for the presentations. I was just wondering, it just came up listening to all the three together. What came up is I was wondering how much maybe we could use this idea of like Confucius idea of wu ke, wu bu ke to approach Wu. And this comes to mind, especially because reading Guoxiang brings this up quite a few times, if I remember correctly. Like Guoxiang actually speaks often, like directly uses wu ke, wu bu ke. And I'm wondering how much this can be used as an insight into how we approach Wu, not just Wu Wei, but also Wu Qing, Wu Yong, Wu Xing. This idea of Wu Ke, Wu Bu Ke is almost like utmost flexibility in a sense, like this idea of being able to respond to any change or difference, and also in a sense without being fixed to any Ming, to any name or role. And because I think this also connects, just to connect also with Rory's presentation, it connects to the Jixia Taoists because they also often speaks of yin shi, like responding to the time and to the situation in a sense, yin bian also. So I wonder what you think of this idea of wu ke, wu bu ke as an entry point into Wu. I know who can take maybe Prof. Li who focused on Guoxiang, if you want to take the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola, for your very important question. And the wu ke, wu bu ke, yeah, I think it could be, it works for Guoxiang is that we do not stick to some certain principles or certain rules. And as I discussed, especially in the Wuxin part, it at least includes the two perspectives. The first perspective is that if the Sage King could be Wuxin, non-self-conscious, then he could be better be responsive of all others, all others other ones who have their self-conscious. So he do not has the Sage King does not have his own 可 or 不可 in this way that he could be responsive to anyone else that they might have their 可 or 不可. So that also lies in the difference between the Sage King and the ordinary people. That's also why Guoxiang will focus on the Wuxin of the Sage King. And the second part, you also mentioned about the transformation and the changing. If we consider this from the time perspective, the Guoxiang would say that we need to be responsive to the changing of the world. Then 无可无不可also applies here, that we do not say, okay, now things are good, but then things are bad. We just follow up. And that also the meaning or the importance of being 无心, and that and the Sage King's Wuxin also related to the other argument Guoxiang mentioned about the Sage King's trace and the reason of the trace 记与所以记. That we do not only learn from the previous sage's trace, but we learn from the 所以记 of the previous sage, and then we could better be responsive to the transformation, to the changing. So thanks for bringing this up. The 无可无不可, I think, also works in the Guoxiang thought.
Maybe I could just mention briefly, because you also mentioned my presentation and the Jixia scholars, Huanglao. So I'm not sure if this is in part what inspired your question, but in this Jianxia, in the description of the Jixia, you have this phrase, this 知万物有所可有所不可, that this describes I can't remember, is it Shendao at that point, or is it the Jixia scholars generally? But this is often, and actually quite similar to how you mentioned this. I'm not sure, but yin shi, this is a term in the Zhuangzi, maybe some other like Huanglao text, but in the Shenzi you have this yin xun, or yin just as the single character. And this knowing that all things have their ke and their bu ke, is sometimes interpreted in relation to the Shanzi embracing all things and all people specifically, and realizing how people have their what they can do and what they can't do, and you should utilize all people. So you have this aspect of it. And whether that is being, spoken of positively or negatively in the Tianxia when they're talking about the Jixia scholars is not too clear, because at the beginning it starts to talk about their positive traits and then gradually starts to criticize them. But okay, that's just a little bit of context there relating to the Tianxia.
I mean, if I could just add 2 cents to the question, 无不可, 无可无不可 is basically the Liangxing in Zhuangzi. And you're walking 2 paths at the same time in the chapter 2. And then you 顺其自然, 无可奈何 is a little bit different. But 顺其自然, you follow what's going on. So I don't, do you really have to go to Confucius to explain Zhuangzi or Guoxiang? Maybe for Guoxiang's case, because Guoxiang, as you said, is citing and referring, quoting the Analects and whatnot. But I think it'd be interesting to look at this idea of timeliness as it relates to what's going on in the Confucian texts and the Taoist texts. because it might be the thread that runs through them, one of those kind of commonalities as well. This responding appropriately given the situation, this idea of timeliness. Well, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Nicole, for your question, and thank all our presenters for their wonderful answers. Do we have another question in the audience? And professors, do you have anything else to our 3 presenters? Is there anything else you would like to?
Where it's all about the ruler should really just do nothing, should leisure around and enjoy life. But that's kind of a different topic anyways.
I suppose my point about golfing and the Zhuangzi was the kind of bourgeois connotations of golfing, and maybe this is showing my influence from Hans Georg Müller here. That I would read the Zhuangzi as an anti-bourgeois text.
Thank you for your comments. So I'll wrap it up and hand it over to. Oh, please.
Just jump in for sorry, Kevin. It stopped recording. Do you mind for just a second there? Do you mind just repeating your response? We just got the end of it in the recording.
Oh,
You're muted.
Professor Turner.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I was just saying in some political texts, like the Huanglao texts and even the Xunzi, you find arguments that the ruler should just be enjoying life, right? The ruler just be, go for massages and maybe not golfing, right? Golfing, of course, wasn't around back then, but, should really not concern themselves with actual affairs of government, but should take care of their life, literally, so they can live a long time. And in that way, something like golf might be on the Huanglao political spectrum. But that's pretty much all I was saying.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. And this character E, which means like to retreat in a leisurely way, is also used like in the Shenzi. Yeah, we mentioned Huanglao, right? Yeah. And I know that Yiwen is writing about early retirement in excavated text in a political context. So I don't know if she has something to say about that.
Me, early retirement. Yeah, that has something to do with the application theory, and yes, the text I am currently working on, the Tang Yu Zhidao. There are like some scholars did mention like there are some Taoist element in that text particularly, but I wouldn't go so far to as far as I'm concerned, I don't really think that text can be related to the Wu Wei and the Zhuangzi idea we discussed today. Anyway, so I would like to. Oh yeah, Professor. Oh, okay.
Oh, me. No, sorry, I was just going to say, but this text does say that you should retire at 70 and look after yourself, Yang Shen, and so on, right? Which is, yeah.
Not directly like you should. It's more like, it would be ideal. It's it's not, the wording's not that strong. Yeah, but yes, it is mentioned. So I would like to thank all of our presenters for their wonderful discussion and their presentation. And I would like to thank all of our audience for coming. And I would hand everything back to Professor D'Ambrosio.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks everyone once again, especially the presenters. And yeah, so this concludes this roundtable, and in about 8 hours we have another one. So maybe I'll see some of you guys back for our next Stronza roundtable today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye. Paul. Thank you, everybody.